This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for another episode of How to Super Age with Elise Marie Collins. And Elise, you have a guest today.
Yes, I do. I have a fabulous guest, and her name is Concha Delgado. She is an author and she's a former professor of anthropology and education. She has extensive research and fieldwork with families of color and communities of color. And she is a prolific author. We're here to talk about her 10th book, which is titled Wings of a Firebird: The Power of Relationships in Our Later Years. And I'm so excited to talk to Concha.
Thank you, Elise, and excuse me, I'm delighted to be here with you, um, and Karen, and I'm always excited to talk about my work.
Yes. Maybe we could start with a little bit of your own story about how you came to write this book. I know I've read it in the book, not to give it away for people, but whatever you're comfortable with telling people today about how you came to this book. And maybe you can even, I know you've written 10 books. That's to me is also interesting. And each book, as authors know, we know each other through an author, and it's called the Women's National Book Association. And it promotes not only authors, it's also librarians, anyone who's helping promote, we call it women in the world of words. So that's how I know Concha. So I know she's an author, but maybe you could talk a little bit about this book, how you came to write it, and anything else about writing books and how you enter in that journey, because to me it's interesting.
Well, thank you. Yes, and it is very interesting for me, and it doesn't always begin like, oh, I'm going to write a book about that. Uh, but the stories kind of shape themselves from the people that I work with, and this one particularly because it is in the demographic, from baby boomers and older, and it's a different step for me because in the past I've written about younger families. However, in more recent work, I began paying attention to the role of older adult members um, and the importance of their role in the family, and in some cases, yeah, in very different ways, whether it be in school with the children, or in other ways, caring um, for a for excuse me, people with health difficulties in their family. And so I began kind of probing more about that, and reading a great deal about the aging and in different cultural communities. Uh, so what I wanted to do was to give voice to people in that demographic of 65 and older, say, or 50 and older, or 60 and older, and um, and understand just what their lives are about. And reading about the statistics of what the issues are of health, or of food, or anything, as you know, is one part of it. But I wanted to hear, like, what are people in Ohio thinking? How are they living their life? What are people in New Jersey thinking? And how, what's going on with them? Are they thinking about being in that demographic, or or approaching that, or what are the challenges that they're confronting? And I began by doing what I call a snowball effect. And I've done this a little in my past research with communities, where I began with people I know and have some contact in those different states, for example, and asked them if they would participate in an interview with me about their lives at this point, at this stage of their being. And if they didn't, who might they recommend? They would sit for a few hours with me, and boy, there, I had to I had to stop at some point because I was just getting people recommended to me or sent to me in so many ways. And as you might know, I conducted many more interviews than appear in the book, and and many I had to screen out because they weren't. I think they were trying to second guess me in what I wanted to know, and so it didn't come across as a story about themselves and their lives. And these, I want to say, came together because to me they form a family of of a story that is a slice of the bigger story in our country and the world of aging uh,
Mhm.
and this demographic. So it began to feel like, one thing that they seem to have in common a lot is whether they're talking about their work um, or their health or their activism and community, or how they're approaching certain situations in their life. Relationships were prominent, and
Mhm.
there was always a someone or many others who seemed to be a part of that part of their life. And I followed that. So I listened for that very intently, and began to shape the how that those relationships so matter in whatever stage of our life we're moving through, of course. But in the later years, it seemed that whether they were relationships of the past that seemed to have a very important role in their life now, or present relationships, and how they were supportive and a very important part in challenging them, or supportive in their struggles, or posing some interesting lessons for them in how they're putting together their later years. And so that's kind of the way it began. um,
So you didn't start out meaning to write about relationships. You actually were just going to write about older adults.
I had, yeah, yes, it was a kind of a broad net, a wide net that I cast out there, in how people were experiencing this time of their life. And so the part of relationships seemed to be a very strong common denominator in how they think about their lives, and how they're formulating their lives, and how they've or those that have been in their lives, that it leave them with some very strong convictions in how they conduct their lives now. So that's kind of the way it narrowed down a bit more. And it's a typically the way that I have worked in my prior research, I'll say, although I don't call this, a strict research by any, in any sense, of the way that I conduct my academic work in the past, but but kind of listening for what the reality is of people who are in those situations in the family, um, and what they feel are the important things that they want to share, and in how they shape their lives. So that's the way in which this came about, as relationships being a very and the most meaningful part that they wanted to convey.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Karen?
Well, you know, as I'm listening to what you're talking about, Concha, so many times when a person turns 55, 60, 65, we assume they have nothing more to say. And our society has done that. We sort of like push them off to the side. And so many of the baby boomers and those who are older have learned to sort of accept this to some degree. And I'm not going to say they vegetate, but to some degree they vegetate because they're not part of the society they were in a couple of years previously.
Mhm.
And now we're coming out of the woodwork and we're saying, I'm never too old. You know, let me live my life. Is this what you were hearing from many of them?
That's a lot, Karen, and thank you for raising that, because um, isolation still, although they, yeah, well, a couple of them, you know, I'm recalling, did very specifically speak of that isolation, um, and very specific reasons, for very specific reasons that were in situations happening in their lives. But um, whether, you know, on the whole, whether, say, this group or, you know, in any community, um, recognize it or not, there is that sense of isolation. One very, one very present one in our daily lives right now, and I talked about it, discussed it with a couple of different people this morning, in fact, is this question of the vaccine, for the COVID vaccine, and how complicated it's been for many, if not all, and how many people it's required to get one appointment for one person, and in a convenient location, and etc. What must it be, and the technology that is required for us to do that, and what must it be for those who don't have it, don't have a smartphone, don't have a computer, and that access to getting that type of information. So they're relying on who? All right, maybe let's hope they have a family member. And maybe if they have a family member, could that family member assist them with by going online to do it? Or some of them do have a smartphone, especially the younger people. But and just what that does to the individual of it feeling helpless in situations where they don't have that sense of control.
Right.
And I think in one of my, I believe it's in the chapter with compassion on, uh, excuse me, health difficulties that people discussed. They, in their story, one gerontologist who I interviewed spoke of the widening of the demographic in her county that she's responsible for in public health, and what it is to have to um, teach those people who are without family, speak a different language, and don't have access to technology, and what it is needed in order to move them to a setting where there is, and teach them how to use this, and make it available to them so that it's possible for them to get the information that they need with doctors and other professionals. And so it's quite daunting in just the work that's
Absolutely.
there for those community professionals that have this work that they do daily. And I talked about
Yeah.
just 1%. I think, well, she was trying to teach them how to use a smartphone, and then they were told how to use, or in the smartphone and how to get on Facebook and so forth. And and they kept talking about, or they kept describing how to post something on your Facebook and all of that language. I mean, even the language of it is quite devastating for for people who have to remember all of that and not be able to and not have access to that daily. And so, they were posting pictures of themselves on their wall at home. And so, this type of communication gaps that exist day in, day out in many of those communities.
Right.
Mm.
I've got to
Yeah.
say, of the people who I interviewed or whose stories we see in Wings of Fiber, were pretty savvy in using technology. That said, some of them did not want to meet with me online or in person. Phone was more comfortable for them.
Sure.
Very interesting. Yeah, I live with my parents and I notice the language as well. Sometimes my mom will say, it's in my computer, like it's inside of it, or it's, I'm a writer, so I notice the nuances. And
Exactly.
sometimes I'm like, I think I can translate that, but what exactly does she mean? And then having a 21-year-old, the words that he uses. So I actually enjoy translating, and I always feel like it's a great opportunity to be compassionate because the older adults didn't grow up with technology. And just like for a child that's experiencing the world, a toddler, we wouldn't be like, don't you know how to, eat your food with a fork? We're not impatient because we're giving them compassion. But why are we so impatient with older adults?
We are. We
Yeah.
are. We are. And yes, in many ways. And it's, and particularly about, um, Zoom, which is the one lifeline with many people right now, and and the lack of access to that for many, then not being able to even see the faces of the people,
Right.
of their dear ones, if they are maintaining the distance and all the precautions that we need to take. But um, but it is that sense of impatience and maybe I don't have a response for that except to um, just informal talk with some of the people in the book, some of my storytellers, and um, a feeling of I hope I don't get that to that point. Um, and there's that underlying fear, I think, and in the way that we think about being with an older person who's looking more frail and feeling more helpless and needing more assistance, and thinking maybe that's where I'm heading, and don't do that, or uh, be strong.
Well, don't you think some of the impatience comes from, and I'm referring to maybe our parents and our aunts and uncles, we remember them as being our leaders, okay? They knew what to do. And now, as they become more frail and they don't, it sort of scares us because we see ourselves in the future.
Mhm.
I know that my mom was totally independent up until she had her stroke. She was 96 and a half years old, living, if somebody hadn't taken the car keys away from her, she would have been driving, but she was doing everything. And yet we could see the little things that she was doing
Mhm.
incorrectly. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that we were taught, luckily, by the caregivers around was come to her in her place. Meaning, if you see that she's making a mistake, don't treat her like a child, but just maybe make a suggestion. How about if we try doing this instead of that? And sometimes it worked, and other times no. She knew better, and as long as she wasn't hurting herself or anybody else, it was like, then let her, she liked to put her sweaters on backwards. She preferred them backwards. And you know what? I mean, we could have told her day in and day out that was wrong, but she was comfortable. So who are we to tell her not to do that? So I think it's part of, we're getting older,
Mhm.
see these people getting older, we see that they're not doing things the same way they used to. And you know what? We don't want to see that in our parents and our grandparents.
No, I think, you really hit on some points that some of the people in the book talk about. And um, from a young person's perspective, I'm thinking of, excuse me, of Lulu, who brought her, excuse me,
I don't have a drink.
who brought her, yes, and everyone take a sip, who brought her mother from the Philippines and to Nevada, where she was studying nursing. And in this cross of miscommunications, of cultural communications in some ways, really, but some of it generational, and where Lulu has her own apartment, is fairly independent, and but still has to care for her daughter, excuse me, for her mother in the Philippines, and is actually commuting back and forth until she and and sometimes she was able to do some kind of a video chat with her, but that was insufficient for what she needed until she finally had her mother had a heart attack where she wasn't recovering as quickly. And Lulu had a choice. She had either move back to the Philippines, which she didn't want to do, or move her mother to Nevada. And in Nevada, Lulu has her brother, who lives a little distance from her, but the family's there with his family. And so mom comes to Nevada, and her expectation is to have family life as she knew it in the Philippines, where we all gather for daily meals, for um, every other celebration. And it's not going to be that way. Lulu's busy with work and still finishing her degree, and mom isn't well, so she needs a little more support at home. And then Lulu's the one having to do all of this because she's living with her. And there comes a time when she just withdraws completely because the mother does, because she's feeling that she's overextending Lulu, and I'm here, I'm getting in your way, and I can see that that you don't have time for me. And so all of those come to a real head until Lulu and her brother kind of put their heads together and try to remedy the situation, but recognizing that they didn't really realize that their mother's expectation was that she would have the family together. She would have the closeness. She would have that warmth. And that's a remedy for healing. But instead, she was declining more and more. Together, they did decide to talk to the mother, and she agreed to talk with them about what issues were she was feeling most vulnerable about. Come to find out that she was scared to death that because she was posing such a problem for Lulu, that they would put her away in a home like the image that they have of nursing homes and the like, of abandoning your family member there, your older family member. And she was, deathly afraid of that. And because she felt that was the way it was done in the US. And now that her children were here, they were conforming to the culture of the US. And oh my goodness, it was a real awakening for Lulu and her brother and family to reassure her that that was not their plan, that she in fact was not in their way, but they knew that she was not comfortable in that setting and so forth. Well, through contacts and so forth, they came to find a Filipino community and that spoke her dialect and her language, not too far away, where she could be there once a week and worship, and agreements were made about how much time they all got together for pancit and all the wonderful foods that they were accustomed to having in the Philippines. So but it was that insight and that wisdom on the part of Lulu and the brother to kind of really try to tease out, and the importance of, what wise mom, it isn't just that she's more frail because of the heart attack. It's, she's obviously going through a great deal more, and the culture shock can cause health problems as well. I mean, and that we have research on.
Your stories speak to so much, and I have a couple questions, or I just wanted to comment about, unspoken expectations. That's, I'm sure, a theme in many families, not talking, making assumptions, and also and between cultures as well. Especially, I mean, I know from my own work as a gerontologist, the number of multicultural relationships and marriages are going way up. And I noticed that was something I did some research on, and how that can cause miscommunication. But one of the things I'm from reading your book and hearing these stories, I feel like the stories, you could hand your book to family members and we could read it together, and it would help, it would help everybody have difficult conversations. Sometimes it's hard to bring these things up, and yet we need to have them. So I would love to hear any other stories that you want to share, some favorite stories, and anything else about those. I think stories are powerful. So I love hearing them. And if you have anything else to say about how stories can heal us in our relationships, because we're not talking about, it's easier to say, hey, mom, look at the story here.
Right.
Doesn't this look like you? Isn't this what you're going through? Yeah, I know. There's, so many. I still, think of them a great deal. I think about the people whose stories we tell and their families, and so much. Sometimes I feel like I just want to pick up the phone and call them. I feel like they're a part of my family, but I've not done that. People ask me, why don't you, why haven't you contacted her, or will you? And I feel I'm not, because that I would sort of destroy what my intent was for the book, and they gave their consent for the book. They didn't give their consent for me to join their family. um, but one intergenerational one that comes to mind is in the chapter "The Grace of Showing Up." Grandparents, and we see it more, and we do know on this, we have statistics that grandparents are taking much more responsibility for in the family and for the family in some cases. Well, in this one case, um, Sylvia, the grandmother, lives in New Mexico, and she's being asked to go to South Texas to be with her daughter, who had cancer. She was diagnosed with cancer at a very young age, had three children, two girls and a boy who was just about getting ready to get in high school, Lucas. And Sylvia thought, well, I can take some time off from my home here. I'm comfortable. I don't want to move, to Texas. And so but she did go, and in her caring for her daughter, who had just lost her husband the year before, unfortunately, was now diagnosed with cancer, and unfortunately, it metastasized to where she died. And so there was Sylvia, grandmother, with three children, now couldn't abandon them. They had no one else, no other family that they could count on. And she decided to stay and provide some stability, some home life for the children, who were devastated. They had lost their father 2 years before, and the mother that 1 year. And they really posed quite a challenge for Sylvia, in a way that shows how in older adults having to do this, take this responsibility when no one else can do it, is quite problematic for their health and for their emotional well-being. She had no community there to speak of, and her community were her children, with her grandchildren, and then try to provide the stability of a household, of a family for them. And there were criticisms on both sides. Well, grandmother wanted them to be more, obedient, the old school way, and do what I say, go to school, da da da. And they weren't necessarily problematic, in that way, although they resisted, no, to going to church necessarily, but they did it. And her account was that it's what I'm trying to do is provide some stability for them, and I'm the network they have to their mother. So I've got to do what I believe their mother would have done. Well, academically, you could see where Lucas, the older boy, was quite dedicated to his work, to his schoolwork, and really try to help his sisters. So he kind of took on the male, well, I won't even say that. We kind of took the older brother's role in the family and tried to assist the younger sisters, who were having a terrible time. And they were more withdrawn. They weren't participating much in either in school or with their friends. So, and felt more restrictions because grandma, had stricter rules, say, than maybe mom would. She was a misunderstanding, they felt. And this I got because I did interview. I did what hadn't done with other families, but in this case, I felt that I really wanted to see the young people's perspective on this. So we got to talk with a boy, excuse me, with Lucas, the older son, and he was very honest, very straightforward about his understanding of just how difficult it was for them growing up through these teen years now with grandmother. And grandmother being a little stricter than they wanted, would have expected their mom to be, but appreciated that she had stayed and they weren't having to go to foster care, which would have been the option in many communities. And I saw that in a couple of the stories where the the grandparents are the one unit, the one family unit between the children and foster care. And no matter how difficult it is for the children being in those situations when the parents can't be with them, it does, it is a buffer for the foster care system as well. They're swamped, and certainly I think the children would much prefer being, with a family, with a grandparent.
Yeah, I'm aware of that as well. And I think there's in California 500,000 grandchildren raising grandparents, and it's not easy. So support. Yeah, I think it's great that you wrote about the relationship and highlighting that because a lot of people don't think about that. Do you have any other
I know.
stories about relationships that you think may shed light for our listeners of how to super age? One thing for me as a yoga teacher, I started going into aging research and gerontology, just thinking, like you said, oh, well, just, I think you were mentioning the way we think about health doesn't always include relationships. And that was always the biggest eye opener, that social support is the number one contributor to health, pretty much at any age, but especially as we age. Yet our society isolates older adults. So that was a lot to say, but I think I think you are very much aware of this. And is there any stories or wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
Um, I think there's one that was particularly revealing. Well, they all were in their own very special way, but with Mercedes, single older woman, 95. I think, or was she 96 when I met with her, and she agreed to sit, and she was on fire, telling her life story. And I loved her energy. She had over her life period had so many different ways that she would deal with the problematic relationships in her life, I'm going to say, and had come away with some amazing wisdom from that. So I felt what she had done, as a young child, was marry her first sweetheart, and she had both had immigrated here from El Salvador. They it was her first job. She loved her work in the factory and what she was doing, and in California. What she didn't know was that when she married her sweetheart, he would be very insistent that she remained at home, that she not work, and restricted her tremendously. And she fought that. She um, felt that she wanted her freedom to work, and that it was her right. And he began abusing her. So it became a very difficult, abusive marriage, even through having three daughters. And even the daughters who were not abused, but saw this as they drove her to the hospital sometimes, uh, insisting that she leave him and separate. Well, so she had a very close relationship with her daughters. And interestingly enough, the daughters also had a strong relationship with their father, but saw them very separately. They wouldn't, you know, they didn't want to see them continue as a married couple for obvious reasons. But Mercedes, who didn't feel that she wanted to call on anybody except her daughters to deal with the situation, continued living with her husband, and would sometimes, so maybe on a time or two, separated from him, but return because he would promise and to be a better husband. But it never worked out. So once her daughters had left home, she felt a little bit unprotected. Like there's no way that I can continue living with this man like this. And very boldly, and she continued working, by the way, she never stopped, and very boldly decided, I'm going to divorce him. And she did in her 70s. So she was in her 70s when she took that final step. Um, and what she was able to do at 95 is have this, what she calls the best time of her life. She was volunteering at the local hospital. She was seeing her grandchildren when she wanted to. She was walking up and down all the streets in her community. Everyone knew Mercedes. So I thought that was a very important message and wisdom to impart, where sometimes people feel trapped in situations that don't look easy to solve. And she found, her strength at a later age, and felt that she was capable of doing this, and proceeded to have the best time of her life at 95. And who of us wouldn't want to have the best time of our lives at 95 when many of the pictures that we see across the media and in other ways are quite the opposite. And unfortunately for many there are, um, but the fact that but reaching out, and in this case she did have her daughters to reach out to, but she became a role model, I believe, for others who in her Zumba class and yoga classes might not have been feeling that freedom and hope to look elsewhere. And I think in teaching each other um, and supporting each other, um, it's a, excuse me, if we get, like, if we get to be so fortunate to live that age, to reach out and in supporting others who may not have that sense of strength and ability and courage to move forward as she did. So I think it was a powerful and evocative way account of her having this potential to transform her life.
Wow. Yeah, I remember that story. It's powerful, and yeah, it speaks to as all the stories speak to so much. They're rich, and it's a great book. Uh, and the listeners can get the book online. Is there anywhere specific? You want to send them to get it? You can hold it up on the video. Great, beautiful.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's
a little bit so we can see.
okay.
Yeah, there.
I'll move
Yeah,
it closer. Yeah, the glare is a little, yeah, difficult.
yeah, power of relationships.
Yes, it's the power, yeah, Wings of a Firebird, and the subtitle down here, Power of Relationships in Our Later Years. And I've, some people have been buying it through their independent booksellers, and they order it for you if they don't have it in stock. And in some cases, they have found that a little more cumbersome, so they go to Amazon or, online sellers.
Yeah, and it is a Kindle.
Yes, it is. Yes.
It is a
yes.
Kindle. It is Kindle.
Yes.
Yeah,
Some
or
people,
you can.
yeah, even before the book was released in paperback, I think Kindle made it available, and I was receiving messages. I'm reading your book on Kindle, and I hadn't even seen it in paperback. But anyway, it is available that way.
Wow. Okay. It's a great book, and you can read it. You could even have a family book club. I think that's a great idea. We all need to think about relationships in our later years. It's so important.
I
And
have, oh, excuse me. Oh, I have had talks with book groups who have read it, and then they invite me in. So that's always fun to do. I'm available for that.
okay, so you heard it. Professor Delgado is available to come to your book club, and maybe even
On Zoom.
it could be a Zoom family reunion. That would be a great one.
It-
Zoom family reunion / book club. That's
yes, there you go.
okay. All right. Any last words, Karen or Concha?
Well, I'm so glad that you've had Concha on. On many of our podcasts, we talk, like I told you before we went on air, we talk about, you know, being accepted, becoming aware of who we all are. And it's not about our age, it's not about how we look, it's about what we want to accomplish in life. And it's owed to us, no matter how old we are, we should be living our life to the fullest.
Well said. Thank you so much, Karen and Elise and viewers or those on podcast radio.
Absolutely. Well,
Right.
everybody take
Audio.
care, stay well, and don't let the pandemic stop you from reaching out to people. This is a great time to reconnect.
Excellent. Yes.
Please, we'll see you in 2 weeks again. So have a great day.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.